Beyond the Pixel へようこそ。私はテクニカルデザイナーのルイス・フェルナンドです。こちらもデジタルアーティストのハケンです。Ken-chan?
That's a beat. Very impressive. Very impressive.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
So you're getting into the Japanese Ghost of Tsushima mode.
Exactly. I've taken all the Western Japanese lessons I can learn from Ghost of Tsushima and I'm applying it directly into this podcast.
Nice.
I will now perform the rest. Not yet.
The what?
Not yet. But I will now perform the rest of the podcast entirely in haiku. Beyond the Pixel, a journey into life. We're gonna stop this now.
That's as far as I can go.
Yep.
Nice. So you didn't beat the game yet. So
no,
dude, I've seen a lot of videos. I've been watching streamers play because I don't have a PS5 or PS4 myself.
I don't have a PS5 either.
Very interesting to see the initial reactions, and then I think the reactions have changed a little bit, in my opinion.
Oh, that'd be interesting to see. I haven't seen anything from outside because I've just been so focused on my own.
Okay. Well, let's get into it because the topic itself. Just forget the topic. The theme of Ghost of Tsushima, I have a soft spot for because I'm a bit of a Japanese folklore fan, but I'm also I have a real strong interest in the Mongol army, and this is based off of an actual event in terms of historic event that happened in Japan. So are you familiar with this time era that's happening right now that takes place in Ghost of Tsushima?
I looked it up when I heard people say this game is not historically accurate. So I wrote, did Mongols invade Tsushima? And turns out, yes, they did invade Tsushima. They did attack the Komoda coast, and they killed an army of 80 samurai, and then took over the island.
Yeah. So it's based off a real event. Now, the larger story about that whole invasion was, and it's super famous. It's where the legend of the kamikaze comes from, right? Because both
Divine
times
Wind.
the Divine Wind, the translated version of that, because both times the Mongol army, a more significant part of it, were lost in storms while crossing the strait. And so that's where the kind of holy divine wind idea came from, because not only once but twice the whole island was saved from invasion. Seafaring at the time was notoriously dangerous, super dangerous. They were based off of sail and physical manpower to row your ship out of storms, which the idea that you're really gonna pull a stick and you're gonna pull a massive boat, the whole point is that they have very little thrust compared to modern day boats, and so they would easily get beach wrecked, right? So anyways, I'll get a bit more into the history of it, but what is your initial thoughts on the game, and how far have you played so far?
Okay,
this is also going to be probably a spoiler warning for anyone, but
I won't spoil any of the story.
I really want to talk about the story, though. I'm
only halfway through it as
even
well.
just as far as you've gotten, because I think that even let's just say we'll go past the first act. Okay, just the first act is fine for me.
Okay. But to start it off, before that, so Ghost of Tsushima is an open world samurai game, essentially. Samurai/ninja game. And you are taking back Tsushima after a Mongol invasion as one of the last samurai that survived the initial landing. It is very much an open world game in the sort of vein that you are used to seeing from Assassin's Creed, for example. You have a map, it's populated with side objectives, it's populated with ambient objectives, and your main story quests. And you go to markers in order to start those. You collect stuff.
You go to little side missions.
You upgrade your weapons. You get crafting materials in order to craft better gear so you can take on better threats. and you engage in sort of heavy, light, stance-based combat. And for the most...
Your typical brawler, like, oh, you have to fight a bruiser, then a shielder, then a DPS dude, etc., etc.
Yeah, although they do have quite a lot of variety in the enemies. They all have different tiers, so that's something good that they do. And overall, I am enjoying the game a lot. I'm thinking about it a lot, about wanting to go and play it, and thinking about what I want to do next in that game. So there definitely is an engaging component to it. The problem that comes a part of it is that it has all these really high and... Oh man, I just realized the sound is kicking off on this thing really loud. But that's okay. That's okay. It's going to be fixed in post. The problem with it is that it has all these great ideas about how you want to navigate this open world. They use a lot of nature to guide you. So as you're galloping around on your horse, sometimes a bird will come down and it'll do an audible chirp that alerts you like, hey, this bird is around, and this bird is going to guide you to something. It can be a special hot springs bath, which will increase your maximum health and allow Jin to reflect a little bit on what has happened in the story.
Oh, is that where he does the haikus?
No, that's a separate collectible, and that's like denoted by a bunch of birds swarming on like outcropping, so you can go there and you can write a not haiku.
So there's parts in the game where you just go to meditate, and then the main character gives this little haiku or little sentence.
You get to pick. You get to pick. You reach this open, and it shows you a nice, beautiful landscape. This game is gorgeous, by the way, in terms of its environment. And then you have three sentence options for each of the three stanzas, and then you end up making something that resembles a haiku, but is not really a haiku. I found a lot about haikus about reading online.
Technically, it's not it's technically not a haiku.
Bit of a tangent. Things I learned about haikus while playing this game and reading up what people had to say about haikus before this game even came out. Haikus are supposed to be snapshots about a moment in time, and then a revelation based on those snapshots.
It's a reflection, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It is not based on concepts. And the moment you sit down to write a haiku in this game, it says reflect on perseverance, reflect on strife, which is not what a haiku is supposed to be about.
Interesting. I would say that I feel like that's probably maybe like in the strictest terms how it got developed, but it obviously became a poem and expression type of tool at some point. Like people took some liberties with it, like they do with all art, and it transformed into like whatever a much more wider group of like expression, right?
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that that's like technically how it started in terms of what haikus are meant to be.
And definitely I've read articles that are read by haiku experts, and they judge the quality of these haiku to be poor.
Well, I definitely don't think that the strongest
you think this computer generated haiku from 3 different options is going to generate high class poetry? Regardless, it's such a small point of it. It's not really what I want to really focus on the game. Anyway, that's sort of the ambient objectives there are. There's also like shrines that you can go and do platforming challenges to get some gear that'll upgrade like your damage or give you bonus resources that you can pick up. Or these foxes that you can follow around, and they'll take you to these Inari shrines, which will increase how many charms you can carry, etc., etc., etc. And those are like the ambient objectives. Then you have the side Tales of Tsushima, which come in the flavors of being about characters, which are awesome, and then the ones that are about the villagers and more generic side quests, which are a little lackluster and usually end with you telling someone that their loved one died.
It's a war, but I think they follow a lot of those like traditional samurai or Western storylines where you either save the villagers or you watch them in despair and it drives you towards the big baddie at the end.
Yeah, it definitely is supposed to imbue the sense that like, oh, these Mongols are ruining everyone's life, or these bandits are taking advantage of everyone, and it all sucks. Sometimes
being invaded sucks. I thought it was gonna be awesome.
they're gonna meet new people and get killed by them. It's great.
So I think for me, it was clear quite from early on that the game is nothing necessarily in terms of gameplay revolutionary. A lot of the concepts and gameplay has been seen in other games before, but I would also say it's very competently executed on almost most of the fronts.
Yeah,
I would say.
And I really enjoy being in that map and going around and organically finding stuff. The best parts I have with this game is when I'm not looking at my map, or when I just say, I want to go to my objective, I want to do a main story objective here, so I'll set that as my tracker, and then I'm okay getting lost on the way and doing other stuff. That's when to me, I've had the most fun with this game. Because
it seems like their UI is meant to get out of your way.
Yes. And I think that's where some of the innovation that I think this game does bring to the fold is that complaint that I had about those maps being way too full.
Right.
And giving this
Ubisoft like dots everywhere, right?
And this gives you a very organic way to find that stuff. And they provide way more side activities than you actually need to level up. So it's almost as if the game is telling, like, I played the first act that way, just going through and doing whatever came across me, what made sense for me to do at first. I didn't look at the map. And I was still able to do all the objectives pretty straightforward with a reasonable level of difficulty. In Act 2 that I am now, I started trying to collect everything. And I have topped out my entire, almost all my skill trees and all my gear because I decided to focus on that. And I'm only halfway through the game. So it almost feels you're really not supposed to do that. Right?
Yeah, that reminds me of Far Cry. I did the same thing. In second act, I was already like maxed out on all my ammunition.
Yeah.
And blah blah blah. Yeah.
And it's interesting.
But I think
because it feels you're not supposed to do everything, and it definitely does. There is no tower that you climb and stuff populates.
I really like that.
You find everything organically, either through following nature or through, hey, these bandits are attacking, these Mongols are attacking people on the road. You rescue them, and then they say, oh. Have you heard of this shrine that's over here? The Mongols have taken it over. Okay, I'm going to go and reclaim that from them. And then it pops on your map, and then you can set a waypoint, and then the wind guides you. There's no waypoint on it. You just press a button, and then the wind. There are so many particles in this game, Ken.
I know.
There are so many particles. It is amazing. You never really feel lost, and you don't have to check your map because you can scroll up on the touchpad, and then a gust of wind will blow particles in direction. But even if you don't do that, the breeze will lightly bend stuff in that direction. So you can just find your way around in an extremely organic way. And I think that is the big achievement in this game. And I feel if it had a little, if it was a little less focus tested, let's be honest.
Focus tested? What do you mean? I'm curious.
I feel like a lot of the stuff that came about in this game that I don't like is a result of metrics needing to be hit. We need X amount of hours. We need players to understand exactly what they're doing at this amount of time. They need to not get lost. They need to feel like they are progressing at a certain pace, like that. Like, it is a competent game, but the problems that I had the most of it is when I'm doing the most glaring example I can think of is in Act 2. You get a mythic quest. Mythic quests are one of the quests that give you gear or give you a special technique, and they usually start with you learning of a legend from a musician. So this one is about the legendary warrior Gosaku, who was only a peasant, but he found this legendary samurai armor, and suddenly bandits came to attack his farmstead, and no one would defend them, so he put on this armor, and he found that no one could touch him, and he defeated all these bandits because the spirit of the samurai who inhabited the armor found courage.
This, yeah. And they kept saying the guy's name like a million times, right? And the story
do you know why? Do you know why they always said his name, Gosaku, all the time? Because here's what you had to do to get Gosaku's armor.
What?
You had to backtrack to Act 1 and liberate farmsteads, which is this new objective they made specifically for this quest. And it is a hostage rescue objective. So there's peasants that are being held by Mongols, and if they detect you, they'll go and try to kill them. So you have to go and attack those Mongols stealthily, and if you get caught, you then have to protect the peasant before they get killed. and they're scattered all over the place. They don't have markers on them. So you just have to wander around this big farmstead. And all the enemies are low level at this point because they're in Act 1, and you have been taking on enemies that are 3 tiers above them, who are a lot stronger, have more attacks. It is boring. It is repetitive. I wanted to just get out of the way. So I just put a marker on all these farmsteads, and all I did was fast travel to the closest spot, take my horse over there, didn't stop for anything along the way. I just checked off the list.
Right.
And that was boring. That was not enjoyable in the slightest because it was incredibly repetitive, and it took up maybe 2 to 3 hours of my time with this game. Was
it an optional quest or
it is
a required quest?
Do you want the armor of Gosaku? I want the armor of Gosaku, Ken. It apparently is invulnerable. I wanted to see what that was about.
So I guess you're saying that you're upset that it made you do something boring
to get something cool.
Yeah.
Right? There's only a handful of armor sets in this game. And instead of hiding... And all the other mythic quests were pretty cool. Right?
I guess the main problem there is just the backtracking idea. I wonder if they do it so that... Because it doesn't seem that there was a lot of these kind of missions where you went backwards, right? Where you went backwards to kill...
No, but there's already a lot of content there. Why would they send you back there? There's another mythic quest that's identical that takes place in Act 2, and you have to go to the certain spots and duel Ronin. Right?
I would surmise that I bet you some people find enjoyment in going back and slaughtering fools after they've leveled up.
But even on that level, it's not enjoyable because you have to assassinate them stealthily. Otherwise, you have this punishing objective of, no, you gotta run and kill these guys. Also, there's 6 of them with 3 hostages each.
I'm not denying the fact that it's probably going to be pretty boring, but my guess would be that's why they added something like that, where they went, like, why else would you, in an RPG style game where you level up and stuff with your gear, send you backwards? They used to do that when Metroidvania type games, and then suddenly all those dudes that you fought at the beginning were way easier. Or like RPGs, like old Final Fantasy games that have quests to take you back. Yeah. And then I got the same sense as you, especially in those RPG quests, because I was like, man, you literally are just A pressing as fast as you can to get through the fights, because all you have to do is like punch them to death, right?
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, though. We're gonna have to, I've been prepping for a while to do a Metroidvania slideshow like one of yours for one of these, because this is backtracking something that I take very seriously.
Offensive to. Take offense to.
Not offense, because
I take offense to it.
Because here's the thing though, because we have sort of lost the good benefit of backtracking, and the thing that I always pointed out with Castlevania, here's a preview. The thing I always point out about Castlevania Symphony of the Night is that when you backtrack in Symphony of the Night, it's not just to kill enemies and go back. You always have a purpose, because you have some sort of ability that also enables you to backtrack faster. Mm-hmm. For example, that you get the wolf form. There's a hallway that you have to cross in that game, and there's all these high level enemies, and you can blitz through them. Yeah.
But I would also counterpoint for your later discussion is that the backtracking wasn't invented for that. That was a smart evolution of backtracking. Mm-hmm. But I think backtracking first came in was the older school days where developers were looking to pad out game times, like you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. And so they forced players to go back and forth a little bit because it generated content for whoever needed to write down that metric. Mm-hmm. But then I think it obviously came to a point where you're like, okay, this could ruin your game if you make players constantly have to do this, right?
Well, the thing to make it work, right, and which Ghost of Tsushima does not, is that you have to give meaningful purpose to it, and fighting the lower level enemies should not be the point, mm-hmm. right? That should just be a bonus. That should just be you reflecting like, oh my god, I feel a lot stronger now. But that shouldn't be the point for you to be backtracking.
Well, in that case, the point is for you to get the armor. Right?
Yes, but it has nothing to do with getting the armor. It is an objective that unlocks the armor, but it doesn't. Yeah. You're not experiencing something different when you're backtracking in Symphony of the Night, and mm-hmm. you're going through levels in wolf form. You're getting a benefit of like understanding how the wolf form works and where you're supposed to use it. Because there's other sections later on in the game with harder enemies that you can also sort of blitz through in wolf form. But because your first situation, it's like you learn something about yourself and your abilities by doing it. Whereas games like God of War and Ghost of Tsushima, these are just keys that you get to unlock stuff. Right.
But that was that
the experience
one. Was
is
that
not
just that one
it.
quest, or what do you think? Was that a majority of the quests that are like that? You're going back and killing a bunch of randos?
I'm only halfway through, and this is the only one that specifically sent me back to Act 1, and that's the one that I found most egregious. There's a similar quest, like I said, where you have to fight Ronin, but that is a new activity. This is a perfect disposition, actually, because it is the exact same quest structure. Go do these 6 things to unlock this special thing. Oh, the corgi. The corgi is making a mess.
I know what you mean. So it's a better execution, right?
Yeah, and that second one where you're fighting the Ronin, when you go and fight them, those are unique fights in interesting locations with unique characters, with unique dialogue, and even special moves that you don't encounter anywhere else.
Yeah, I get it. I get the part that it's boring to fight old opponents. My whole point was just how bad is that situation? If it's one quest out of so, I'm like, one quest designer decided to say, let's try this, and then if it works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't. I'm much more concerned. Like, the whole thing about Ghost of Tsushima, in terms of the kind of conflict that happened, I guess, online early on, was like people were expecting a very much a Sekiro type game. It being obviously a similar type of like theme, and then people were expecting combat to be a bit harder. Whereas it's a much more cookie cutter combat, gameplay wise. Like all the things we mentioned, like there's nothing in there that's actually like gameplay new. Like what? Sorry, I can't remember. I always forget the name of that Star Wars game that came out recently.
Fallen Order, Jedi Fallen
Order, right? So Fallen Order is a very similar gameplay for game as that, right? I would say Fallen Order is a much smaller version. Ghost of Tsushima executed better in a lot of senses, and I love Fallen Order just because it was so fresh, but it also had like major issues. And I wasn't
a fan of exploring those worlds, and I wasn't a fan of the combat either.
The combat had glimpses, but then like we were saying, it's stuff that other games have done already, and like quote unquote better, right? And for me, a lot of it was just being in that universe was a big deal. But if you compare it to Ghost of Tsushima and Fallen Order, and you can just see that like what a difference you can do if you just execute on everything that everyone else has done, but just do it as well or slightly better than them, right? And I think that Ghost of Tsushima as a package is much more complete. And then it also has I would say like one S tier category, and then all the other categories that I can kind of rank the game in, or kind of like A, B, kind of average, AAA title.
I would say like the environment is definitely the standout for me. The environment and the traversal, and the combat is also, while it's not very different, I think it is diverse and flexible in a way that I enjoy just experimenting with.
I would like to give you a theory, and you can back me up of whether you think this theory is right or wrong. So my idea of what's S tier is their art execution, right? That includes the backgrounds and the environments, which is key. But in terms of the combat, what makes it interesting to me and what I attribute to the art side is actually the animation is super clean in terms of the type of fighting stances that you're getting, and the cinematic camera usage that they like just have naturally. It's very easy to find cinematic moments in that game, especially while you're fighting, right? They have gameplay execution problems and coding execution problems in terms of the combat. And like if you watch a Twitch video rather than like this kind of trailer stuff that we have, you see a lot of like foot floating and like wrong-footed animations, and you're jumping and it looks kind of awkward. But then the moments where they sequence the animation, like in Arkham Asylum, when you trigger a double block or something, it goes into like a set animation, right? That kind of like magnetizes your hand. I think those animations are like S tier in terms of what they do, but then the execution is a bit off in terms of maybe like how the programming works or how smooth it like snaps together. But I think that's what kind of, for me, every time I saw something that was impressive about the game, it hit something about the art side, or like I could pinpoint an element to the art side that I like would say is the thing that is key to it. So like I mentioned, like the animation for that, but that's the thing that stand out for me was like this game seemed to be really art focused first, like art and story, because I kind of intertwined those two, and then they just said let's make everything else like generic but good. Right? What do you think about that?
I agree, and I think the important thing to note is the combat. The disjoint between the art and the combat, like you have these nice animations, but sometimes it doesn't link up. I think is also into the favor of how snappy the combat is. It's extremely responsive in ways that, like The Witcher, for example, the way you way you move around in The Witcher is very rigid, or Red Dead Redemption. The animation priority is extremely high. This game also has the best controlling horse I've played.
Oh, hey!
It feels that horse will not screw you over in most situations, and you can turn it around on a dime, and like it looks nice when it goes. It doesn't do like the.
I found the mounting sort of animation was smooth. Like other games, it's so like rigid to get on your horse. Like you have to like get there, stand still, wait for the prompt to come up so the animation will line up properly or some crap like that.
The control feel in this game is very good, and I think that's when you get the disjoint in the animation is because they do seem to prioritize the flexibility. So you can interrupt any attack that you start doing, like you're going for a heavy strike, and then you realize, oh crap, this is not going to hit. You hit block, that animation cancels in a weird way, but you will block the attack, and that gives it a very good combat feel.
Yeah.
Similarly, the way things change sometimes won't look nice because
you're jumping.
And because they're on different levels.
Yeah.
But they will still hit, and you still get the auto effect of the clinking and the clanking and the controller vibration, right? And all that fits together to make it, even when it looks wonky, it still feels great, and you don't notice it while you're playing it so much.
So I had a conversation about this exact topic with an animator friend, and he was just telling me that there's always a combat of the animators between control and looking good, like we're talking about, and like the feel of the best feeling games are the ones that react immediately to your controls, right? And then the worst ones that you just mentioned, like The Witcher, the big problem with The Witcher is that they have these swings, and the button press is just like square, 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 or whatever the button it is. But they have these animation swings that take over your character for long periods of time while it's moving your character into a set position because the animation's like on a rail. And so it feels terrible because one, you can never cancel out of those animations, so you never have a chance to feel like you have control. And then two, like the animations often miss because like you don't know where this sword's gonna go. Like your character is doing a swing that's gonna swing like 3 feet to the right of you, and you have no idea because you're just mashing this button, right?
Yeah.
So so I found it interesting that, or I found it like a good thing that they allow you to do those animation cancels. I think it's more important in a game to have that kind of control because you forget that's still the main input method that your players have, right?
It also
depends
to make it
sloppy.
Yeah, it also depends on the game though, because you have games like Monster Hunter and Dark Souls where animation priority is part of the gameplay as well.
Yes.
So know as soon as you commit to an attack, you are committed to that attack. You're going to follow it all the way through, and your animation is going to end. And that's similar to how fighting games work in a way. Like fighting games are all about canceling your animation, right?
Yeah.
But if you whiff an attack in a fighting game, you're watching that entire animation play out and your recovery flames afterwards. Yeah. And that's the part of those animation priority games like Witcher and Dark Souls and Monster Hunter is understanding your move and where it's going to put you. They use that as part of the learning curve. Now with a game like Ghost of Tsushima and Batman, where the punchiness of the combat and the reactivity, being able to like see something coming at you and being able to block immediately because your reflexes, it's reflex heavy. It's not a premeditated in a sort of way.
the whole programming and animation system has to be built up from scratch to react to the player's input instead of reacting to the animation instead, right? And that's what you see in like Arkham Asylum, Spider-Man, anything where you're doing reactive counters, or like Ghost Shadow of Mordor. Like there's oftentimes where what they do is they have these like attachment points on everyone's limbs, right? And then when Spider-Man's going to block two guys, they magnetize the limbs onto his hands, so it looks super snappy. But this goes back to what we were talking about in Spider-Verse, is that if you're talking about something that happens in 1 or 2 frames, you can get away with a lot, as long as the main gesture's there. Then everything else can almost get thrown out the door. So in Spider-Man and in Batman, you just feel like a badass when it happens, and it looks like it's proper because you don't actually know what it's supposed to look like. It happens in a couple of frames.
And it's interesting because that is, again, it goes back to what we always go back to, of how playing a game is so much more important than watching it. You watch Ghost of Tsushima combat and you're like, well, this looks like these animations are all over the place and like everyone's clipping through everything. But you play the game and you have a blast.
I will say though that the environment and the camera work, and I talked last time about how important camera work in games is becoming. It makes it so that everything you're looking like is so easy to look at. Like there's even the quest areas that were side quest areas that I was looking at, like they had a lot of landscape planned moments that you're just like opening up into, and you're like, wow, this place looks so amazing. Or there's nowhere that feels kind of boring. Whereas if you're exploring, even The Witcher, which I thought was like one of the most amazingly built environmental games, has its moments where you're going across the land and you're just like, oh, this just looks like a boring place. Like you're looking for places that are more interesting. Whereas Ghost of Tsushima seem to have been able to narrow their map size down enough so that they can handle having a lot of these like cinematic areas.
They also managed to put the entirety of Japan's biodome into a single island.
I know,
which is kind of funny.
They took a lot of liberties. They took it's like you be in the middle of nowhere.
In the south,
like, where are all these leaves coming from?
In the south, it is spring. In the middle, it is autumn. Up north, it is winter.
What's it's ironic though is like Japan as an island itself has very extreme weathers. So like if you're on the Midland, you might see this across the year, right? But not like in one place.
Yeah. But you know it pays off. That game is an absolute joy to explore. I thought like I saw Act 1 and I'm like, okay, most of the game is gonna look like it. I go to Act 2 and there is swamps, there is valleys, there is canyons, it's a completely different biosphere than in the first act, and that was such a joy to like see and be like, oh, I'm excited once more to explore this new land and see what's out there. I know what's out there because I've done all the side missions, but it's gonna look cool while I'm doing it. It's gonna look interesting. It's gonna be a pleasure to explore.
So when I first saw the game though, like I was watching some streamers play through the first act, I wasn't that impressed with the first act. I think it actually has kind of a weak first act.
It has a weak first 2 hours for sure.
Yeah, like it doesn't present you with anything new, and the fact that we've seen so many of these different gameplay elements before, I think hurts because it's like you're worried that it doesn't bring anything new. But I think the turning point is definitely after the end of Act 1, and this is where I wanted to get the spoiler because it was the turning point for me is when so there's a couple things I want to talk about. Well, and I want to see if it was just me because I have, like I was saying, I have a fascination with the Mongols, and one thing I loved about this game is that it does a great job of historical portrayals in terms of its artistic design, in terms of like the character faces, for example. They look like the ethnicity. It's hard to do for a bunch of Western like people, like, you know, like I don't expect a lot of Western companies to be able to do it. So anyways, I was really impressed by that. But so what happens at the end of chapter 1, when you have your I want to make sure that, can you tell me what happens at the end of chapter 1? Because I don't want to spoil it in case I'm thinking of a different moment that's incorrect.
At the end of chapter 1, I wonder if we should have like a little spoiler sign.
Yeah. This is spoiler. Whatever. Spoiler.
So your objective in Act 1 is to rescue your uncle who was held captive by the Mongol leader Khotun Khan in this castle that bridges between Act 1 and Act 2. Yeah. And you go there and you rescue your uncle.
Right.
Pretty basic stuff. No surprises. That's it.
Okay, hold on. Let me just quickly look this up. It might be the end of a different act.
There's only 2 of them. There's only 3 of them, so.
There's only 3 of them. I was like, wait a minute, there's definitely more than 2.
So I meant there's 2 points where you could spoil it.
Oh, okay. What isn't there a point in the end of the act where the Mongol leader, the Khan, no, you haven't met the Straw Hats yet, right?
Yeah, I've met the Straw Hats.
Have you done everything?
Yeah, yeah, I've gone through the thing that you're thinking about where his friend does the thing. Yes.
Okay. That's the point I wanted to spoil it to, because that's the point that I was like, God damn, it's actually gotten to a pretty good story. Okay, so we've already said
that's the part that I felt
right?
was like most predictable.
I wouldn't say it's not predictable, but I would say that
there's more going on than just the invasion.
Yeah, well, it's the first time that I cared about the characters, because even though it's I don't like, for me, I personally value how they've executed that type of story. So okay, we should just get into the story part. So this is when you meet the Straw Hats, and then you're supposed to help them out, and then there's a confrontation that leads your best friend and you to have to fight, right? And the whole point is that
because he wants. He needs food for his men, so he's going to help the Mongols because they promised him food.
So then after he gets defeated, the part that I particularly thought was cool and like a good story in the whole Mongol business is that the Mongol Khan gets him to either light his own farm people or villagers on fire, or open the gates to the Mongol and allow them to like take over this fortress or whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the things that I liked about the game is that you don't have to know a lot of these historical accuracies, but you can tell the studio really delved deep into the different cultures' histories and got correct the mannerisms and how these rulers and conquerors acted. The Mongols are during this period are at the height of their civilization. They have become undisputedly the strongest and largest empire the world has ever seen after conquering China. And literally no one...
Because this is after Genghis Khan. It's Kublai Khan.
This is following Genghis Khan. And then this is during or after Kublai Khan's era, because Kublai Khan took over all of China, which is a feat that I don't think has actually been... that's ever happened besides this one time in Mongol history. And then they're set on taking the island of Japan next, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there at this point there had already been a plethora of evidence to showcase how the Mongols acted, and the Mongols acted very much in this type of turn your own people against you warriors, type of strategy. They were the kind of definitely the antithesis of the samurai honor, and it was very interesting to get them for them to find this one moment in history where they did have a conflict, and then showcase the differences between the culture, right? And so you're going to be getting into this as the game progresses, and I think it's already kind of clear the themes of honor are heavily portrayed as a key point of the story, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's all this talk about in your flashbacks what's an honorable kill and what's dishonorable, where at the same time it constantly gets you to do stealth ninja mechanics, right? And so
I like the first time that you do one, it makes a flashback. Like the first time you assassinate someone, it makes a flashback to the flashback.
You're like, wait, what? How deep are we going?
When we kill, we look our enemies in the eye, and then you're like, and then nope. It cuts back to gameplay, and then Jin's like, sorry,
nah, this is much easier. And so I love this whole concept. First off, it's a great connection between your main character and the world around him. And so for me,
and the gameplay, because it's considerably easier to use those tools in combat.
Yes, you want to use those tools because they're
so
overpowered.
They're so incredibly overpowered. I can clear out an encampment with just my sword. Sure, I've done it, but I use 2 sticky bombs and everyone's dead.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
There's a smoke bomb that stuns everyone, so you can
and you just run around and stab them. It's just like in Assassin's Creed. It makes the game a cakewalk.
So I
You
want to
feel
get back to this
dirty.
whole idea of honor, right? Because then I think one of the keys to having a strong story in any game, and you can kind of relate it to The Last of Us as well, is that your main character's environment needs to reflect the internal struggle that they are going through, and that's a part of their entire story arc. You know, and in The Last of Us, Ellie, it's the idea of like the world is crumbling, and how do you keep your morality, right? Right, just like when your own morality has to crumble, and like what do you decide to keep and what do you decide to like let go of for whatever reasons, right? And for this one, it's the theme of honor, and so it's very important that the environment is constantly questioning this part of Jin's personality and growth, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason I love that they picked this moment in time is because the Mongols were notorious for always they would come up to a settlement, and they would give the settlement two options. They would say either you surrender right now, right? And then they would enslave your entire population, and it was like a no term surrender, or they would kill everyone. And when we say kill everyone, historically it's been said, but usually it's like, oh, you know, they killed all the soldiers and the people scattered around. The Mongols made it a point to devastate and to kill everyone, including the dogs and animals of a village, right? And it was their whole strategy was to incite so much terror into the populace, because they were going up like massive kingdoms like China, it had huge territories and with multiple different nations, that they would scare the future combatants so that they wouldn't lose as many warriors, because they wouldn't have to take these cities, right? And in the early days of the Mongolian army, they didn't have siege weapons. They came from horse archers, and so they were great on the open field, could destroy almost any army. But whenever it came to cities, they would always have to find other ways to spare their own soldiers, and they would do things like they would take. Oftentimes, a castle would be surrounded by its local populace, the farmer lands and the kind of smaller village, but there would be one stronghold in the middle. So then when a castle is under siege, they would take control of their entire population and force the population to attack the walls, so that the soldiers inside would have to fight people that they knew, they could recognize, right? And that caused like tons of dilemma. So they, in a sense, were the exact opposite of the samurai, which have this, at this point in time, have a very strict code of ethics around war. And so it's very interesting to bring the Mongol Empire, because they could have done any point of Japan with the samurai, right? Like, and especially samurai versus samurai, which has been done like all the time. But to bring the Mongols in is such a great juxtaposition, because it forces Jin to decide whether he wants to use these essentially losing but traditional tactics, or give up, you know, a big part of himself to survive and deal with the realities of war, right?
Yeah. Although it doesn't matter at the end of the day whether you do or not.
In gameplay wise, you mean, right?
No, in story wise. In gameplay, it absolutely does, because it makes your life a lot easier if you do.
Right, yeah.
But it's
story-wise,
not.
you mean,
The story is gonna go the way it's gonna go.
Yeah, there's no like you get
no
to
matter
choose
what
this or you get to choose. Well, I would say that the conflict is for the character, not for the player, right? This is where your character is meant to. You're just meant to see the idea of him having to struggle between one or the other, right?
It just doesn't seem like he struggles a lot, though, right?
I think that's the point. Like, I think that I don't think we're supposed to believe in honor. I think the whole idea of honor for most of Westerners is derelict, right? Like, it's not
also in
applicable.
Akira Kurosawa movies, like, or even any other Japanese. I watched Harakiri, the remake, again recently. I seen the original
nice.
Harakiri.
Yeah.
Harakiri is a movie that's all about proving how meaningless honor is in an era where there is no war. It's set in the Meiji period, right? Where Japan knew like a long era of peace, and all samurai were pretty much like laid off unless if they were held as retainers.
Yeah.
And there's this notion of honor for all these samurai who have never fought in a war.
Yeah.
And all these old samurai who are like broken and can't even fight anymore, and they're preserving this idea of honor in a world where they're letting poor people starve. Right?
I think that's another way to like discuss how silly that idea was. And the whole idea of honor is it's essentially like a flower that can only grow in a greenhouse. because the whole concept of honor in Japan was only applicable because they were an island nation that was warring with each other and so insular that they didn't have to ever worry about a nation like the Mongols dealing with it. Whereas a country like China, I don't think had that same level because they always had to deal with large kingdoms at their door that you're trying to break them up. The history of China is, they call it the romance of the three kingdoms, right?
Yeah.
Because China's just
I
been
played
known
Dynasty Warriors.
China's been known to be fractured for so long up until a defining point where they were able to like unify, right, for a while, right? So I think that was I think it's a great interesting way to explore aside of because The Last Samurai, that movie with Tom Cruise, right? I love that movie, but it glorified that idea to no ends, right? And getting into my own little history buff with Japan, this isn't... So another thing that I wanted to put before I say my next point is that the Japanese audience seemed to love it. It's very well received in Japan in terms of its ability to... I think the reason it's done well in Japan is because it's playing off a theme that all of Japan has kind of culturally gone under, which this isn't the first time that Japan has had to rethink its idea of honor. It's had to do it so many times. Like you mentioned that exact time period where Japan finally coalesced into one empire, right? And then there wasn't general war in the country anymore. So this whole class of warrior lords, samurai, had nothing to do. And so during that period, this is the period just before World War I where Japan had to modernize, right? They had to integrate all of their warrior culture into the rest of the population. They had to become like, your farmers and your politicians and your educators and this middle class that grew up afterwards. But the samurai creed was specifically chosen from the government. They picked one particular subsect of samurai, like Bushido ideology, that fit with the government's need, which is patriotism and
nationalism,
duty, right? Nationalism, right? And they infused that into their population. But the point I'm making about the next time that Japan had to deal with this idea with honor was World War II, when their whole aggressive samurai style spilled out onto the world, and it led to, in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are defining moments in the culture, right? That really not just those two moments, but the fact that the war took and killed so many of their samurai spirit people. I think that the whole population at some point had to rethink, what does it mean to live with this idea of honor that has been diffused into the entire culture and society, right? So I think that's why it resonated so well in Japan, and I think that's one of the things that's often missed in the gaming world about the difference in what goes well in Japan and what does well in the West, is that there are often these themes that are just so poignant to their particular culture. This idea of this is when I was talking about Akira. Akira is about post-nuclear world, right? And that's directly influenced from also the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, right? So I found that really, really interesting, and I think that's if you can see it from that particular lens, you can see this one how this game for me, which is I would say it's a good game, but I don't even think it's a game of the year game. I think it's a good game that's worth playing. Right?
I like it a lot, and I recognize it has a lot of problems. It's not. I'm not gonna tell someone to run out and buy it like Last of Us 2, but I really do like the game.
Yeah. But I think I can see for a certain audience, if this is specifically made for Japan, it would be an amazing game. Just like how the difference between Black Panther is to a black audience versus everyone, just a general audience, right? There's cultural significance to the story that they're telling that resonates in a very strong way.
So here's the interesting thing, because prior to the release of the game, when I was still reading articles, was the people were very critical about this being a Western game with a very Western notion of honor that was still
you
almost
can see how, right? You can see how.
Glorifying it in a way. Because when you look at the character of Jin Sakai, he is
Rambo.
He's kind of a yes, but also he's a little dopey. In a certain way, he definitely he definitely feels like he has to care for all these peasants, and he's very like, no, honor is about protecting the weak and etc. But the peasants like also outsmart him a little bit at some point.
Yeah, they do a lot more than he gives them credit for.
Same with like Yuna. Yuna is a peasant, and like I think she's the one that starts to make Jin turn and recognize the peasant class a little bit more as like, these are important people that are ultimately going to help us take back Tsushima, not these samurai.
And I want to add, Yuna also, I think, plays the role of like the option that honor does not allow, right? Like she explores all the options in terms of gameplay that are dishonorable. Like all of her missions are stealth missions.
Yeah. She's the one that gets Jin to like kill someone from behind for the first time.
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly. So and that's another great storytelling mechanism, is that you have characters that are around your main character that embody people who are either living the alternate option that they need to see, right? So that criticism could be like, there is some validity, because it could be that this is a Western take in terms of it's a system that really tries to shine a different light on honor, whereas you see in movies like the great Kurosawa, like they present honor in a very glorious way, and it's on a very good side. It's always like the really loyal Ronin that gets that needs to find a master that's like worthy of his services or whatever, right? It's always for the side of good. Where I
don't know if Kurosawa trends on that though. His movies are usually like, I think of Rashomon, right? Which is all about how Rashomon is a movie where it's almost like a crime investigation about this man that gets murdered on a road, and they're trying to figure out what actually happened, and everyone has different roles of the story. The whole theme about that is like, is there any good and truth left in this world? And even the one good person in that movie also ended up in that crime scene lying that he saw it so he could steal a dagger and sell it for money.
But that was that particularly related to the whole concept of honor?
No, right? And I'm trying to remember if there was any Akira Kurosawa movie that I saw that was about honor.
I don't think Kurosawa necessarily had direct statements on the samurai concept of honor.
Yeah.
But
the two ones that I saw that did was Sword of Doom, and
Seven Samurai,
and Harakiri, which were not Akira Kurosawa movies.
What about Seven Samurai?
Seven Samurai didn't seem so much about honor, because there was nothing honorable in them defending the peasants. He even says when he introduces them, I want to do this mission. There's no glory in it. It is purely to help peasants.
But then the whole idea for honor in Kurosawa is that it's not about glory. Like, honor is this higher concept of doing good, right? And I would argue that there's another point in that movie where he has a lord that he's friends with, and the lord makes the sacrifice of denying the bad guys crossage of this bridge. But then in order to do so, he commits...
That's 13 Assassins.
No, this is in Seven Samurai. This is like a part of the storyline of the band of attackers that are about to attack the village, was like a part of this from this one particular lord, right? And then a friend of him, the only way that they were able to force the bad guys into like a particular location was because he had a friend lord that blocked passage. But then,
are you sure that's not 13 Samurai? I don't remember that, because in Seven Samurai,
sorry, 13 Samurai. Sorry,
no, 13 Assassins is the one where they're trying to kill the one guy to get them into the village that is going to ruin the government of Japan. Seven Samurai is the one where
they go protect the village, right?
Yeah, Seven Samurai is the one where they're protecting the village from bandits. 13 Assassins is the one where they rig a village to do a surprise attack to kill someone.
You're
that
right.
That one,
13.
yes, is about honor.
Yes.
That one, yes.
So that's my exact point. Sorry, you're 100% correct. But the exact
Seven
point
Samurai,
is that,
13 Assassins.
The whole point still stands. I think that thing is, even though I think it's also because Kurosawa is talking to it's coming from a Japanese side where honor is so naturally ingrained as good that you don't have to point it out as much, because there wasn't any question of that he was going to commit hirikiri on the bridge, right? Like that whole the whole honor system was kind of
That was not an Akira
present.
Kurosawa movie. FYI.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. The whole idea was that it's presented as a thing that like he did it because he was good, and if he didn't do it, he would be bad, and the bad guy is bad because he wouldn't do it, right? Like he was. I think even is given the choice at some point, right, and decides to like run or something. Am I thinking of a different bad guy movie?
Maybe. I'm pretty sure in that one he just gets into a fight and then like the main character is just like, and now you die.
Yeah. Anyways, so I do think that, you know, I think it's very interesting that Ghost of Tsushima takes a different take on it, and takes a take that's like, you know, what is the shortcomings of, you know, being good, because we all know that being evil has stronger like force ramifications, especially in a time of war, right? So I think it was quite a good point, and that's what I liked about the game so much, is like it's the craftedness of not say the craftedness, but the where they decided to make a point or say something. I liked what they did with the story, right? And I haven't beaten it, or I haven't seen the end of it yet, but the fact that it's gotten me quite interested is quite good. And the game also, like we were talking last time about what gameplay can do for a story, and Ghost of Tsushima got me thinking, not necessarily because they do it, but it got me thinking that because what you do in that game is that you're in between the big story points, you're helping these villagers, right? Like with your side quest missions and stuff. That's what you're doing right now, right?
Yep.
And I just made me think that, you know, the thing that's missing in storytelling in movies is that whenever you have these long periods, they always have to do a montage or a cut or something like that, which kind of it spoils the reality of it, right? Have you ever had like in a movie where they're like, hey, ring ring ring, call, big conversation, and they just immediately hang up, and you're like, well, in real life you would never do that, right? In real life you would have like an end or something, and then, or like in a comedy they would have someone say a joke and then it would cut to the next scene. But in reality, it's like, okay, you just said this
there was a
mean
moment
thing.
after that joke.
Yeah, there's this moment after that joke, and it's like, did you just say something super mean? Do they have to like make up afterwards, right? Like,
how do you walk out of the store after making a scene?
Right. So I think what games could do is they could allow you to they could explore that moment, the moments that actually happen in real life, like after a big moment, what do you need to do next? And usually it's like these more mundane little things that build up to these bigger moments. Because I just kept thinking of, like, I was watching these streamers play, like you have this big attack on Tsushima, and then you got to go make your sword, and you got to go find some bamboo and stuff like that, right? Not necessarily that it needs to be boring, but I do like the idea that in reality things don't need to happen boom 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 boom.
Yeah,
you know, it could be these moments that are slowing down, but maybe you find a way to still be interesting enough. But then by the end of the story, just because you have these hours in it, just the sheer quantity of hours changes the story. You know, it's like when you're playing a battle royale, and if you're the last man standing, it means more because you spent the first bit of time
hiding in the bathroom,
right? Exactly, hiding in the bathroom, whatever you want to do, camping, right? But in this game, it's like, you know, it means a bit more because you spent that time, but you can't just fast forward and get it to feel the same way, right?
If you do all the main story missions, I guess. Yeah,
it's true. But, you know, I didn't say that.
But I feel like that's not how you enjoy the game, right? It's definitely exactly what you said. Is that's where you get the enjoyment out of it. It's not rushing through the main story quest. It's being in that world, committing to making your Jin the best you can be, and then
having like little moments of his like personality show up, and then getting to like have these big moments play out.
There are moments in that game, or this is something that I feel I do a lot in games where like I'm grateful they invented an analog stick, because as you have your objective where it's like, okay, now I'm gonna go fight this guy and he's waiting for me in a circle, and like, yeah, sure, I can click in the stick and sprint towards him, and like after having this dialogue, or like, no, I am walking with determination, and like after a big fight that I have it, I'm swiping left on my pad to flick the blood off the sword and sheath it slowly.
Okay, so tell me more about the gamepad and the usage, because I heard it's like it's one of the few times it's not annoying. You know, it's like,
I mean, it doesn't. It's just used to offset commands, right? Because you have all your it's all flavor stuff. Yeah. So if you swipe up on the D-pad, it does the guiding wind thing that like does the gust of wind that shows you where the map is going. You swipe left, you pull out your flute and you play the song you have equipped, and that changes the weather.
Okay.
You
This
swipe
is like Ocarina of Time or something.
Okay, yeah, it's actually kind of cool. You swipe right,
Yeah.
and then he will either draw or sheath his sword. If there's blood on
Mm-hmm.
it, he will do one of 3 or 4 animations where he is wiping the blood on his sleeve,
Which is
flicking
awesome,
it,
by the
or
way.
does stuff, and like
It's
puts it
great
back
flavor.
in. Yeah. And then the down option is to show respect, so he does
Yeah.
like a little bow.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
if you do it next to a body, he will like magnetize to the body and bow to the body.
So there's a
So
game
there's a
called
little-
Jedi. Sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, these are just little flavor actions that you do if you want to just embody the character more. Is like the sword blood flick and the bow.
Yeah. I was gonna say there's a game called Jedi Knight, and they have a lot of scenes in that game where there's like a platform and there's a bad guy that's been waiting for you this entire time, and they surround that whole environment to look badass. And like you said, every time I press the button that flourishes your little lightsaber, it does a little twirl. Like you because that's what it is. Like the best moment would be like when you're fighting it, you want to feel like you're have a little bit of control, and just be able to do that option makes it like, okay,
Yeah.
let's set the mood for this.
Yeah, it's that gameplay, right? It's Jin is not going to go and fight this evil Ronin that has murdered a bunch of innocents. It's you are going, and you are gonna do it slow and deliberately
Yeah.
because you're doing it honorably.
Or you can be like the guy who wants to be a joke, and you're just rolling around the cutscene the entire time as they're
Yeah.
trying to exposition on you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think like you and I are both cut from the cart where story and motivations easily influence us, and we're like, yeah, I want to be this guy. We want to be something we're not.
I just recently started playing Divinity 2, Divinity Original Sin 2, and I love listening to the entire voice line. Like all they add a lot of good work into the voice acting, and then I love just listening to just pretending that this whole story is like super real, and because I love
Do
it
they
when
even voice they voice the PC?
They voices no, the PCs don't have voices. I think they do, but it's weird if you're the character, if you have the character selected and you talk to someone, it's suddenly like as if you are that's your new PC, because you have six possible characters you could be.
Okay.
But everyone else is voice acted.
Whoa,
so they
that's
have
a lot of dialogue.
A lot of dialogue.
Holy
And
crap.
top tier dialogue too. Like when the moments
Really?
that are serious, that you can believe that like there's no weird voice acting that throws it off.
It's not like Mass
Red
Effect
Alert?
side quest.
Oh, yeah, where they have like eyes that are looking off into the distance. Yeah. So,
Elder Scrolls.
Ghost of Tsushima, overall
Ghost of
recommended, you think?
Yeah,
you?
Ghost of Tsushima. If you want to play a nice open world game with beautiful environments and enjoyable reactive combat, go for it.
I love the costumes, the Mongol
They're-
designs. I love them.
Your own outfits too. I was
Yeah,
impressed
it's badass.
because there is dyes for them, so you can change some color. But there's also 3 different tiers. There's 4 tiers, but the 4th tier doesn't change it. There's 3 tiers of outfits, and if you buy one color, you also buy the colors for all of them. But because you're adding stuff, they even use different symbols and stuff for like on the cloak. So there is a
nice.
ton of cosmetic options in this game. It is baffling. I got more hats than I know what to do with. I don't know
Yeah.
where Jin puts all these hats.
I can always tell a game that has not an excess of art, but I would say like that it's art heavy, and this game feels like it, and that's why like you get so many of these like costumes. I feel because
Yeah.
the Mongol baddies like okay, this game is clearly heavily influenced from the Netflix film Marco Polo, because it was the first real strong Hollywood adaptation for like the Mongol army, and they took that and they developed and they did exactly what games do, which is make it badass. It's like, okay, this is what like the real king might look like this, but like a video game king would look like this, and it's like, oh, I loved how cool the different Mongol baddies were. I will say I will just nitpick, but it's not really a nitpick because I understand it's a game, right? But I will just point it out because I find it interesting. So the Mongol army is notoriously known for being a horse-based army. Like every single person is on horse in the Mongol army. That's not to say at this point in time, the Mongol army has now pretty much absorbed a massive portion of the world, of the known world, Asia, and has already started to attack like places like Eastern Europe, right? And so they've now like assimilated a population which has a lot of foot soldiers, blah blah blah. But then in this game, every Mongol was like literal Mongol, so that's not something that most like games or movies portray. But I just wanted to point out that it's the one thing that they weren't able to do, because this is a cookie cutter of a different like Shadow or Mordor, blah, 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 where they have lots of standing bruisers, right? You're not going to have an army of horse people. That's be a very specific game tailored to it, right?
They do shoot arrows from a horse. I've seen it before.
They do, right?
But they never chase you on a horseback all that much. You don't do much horse combat.
Nope. And you would say that if the Mongols were to invade a country like Japan, that doesn't have as much open plains, they would be forced to fight in a different way. But I would just want to point out that particular fact about the Mongol army, because that's how they beat like almost everybody in the world. The Mongol army so to talk about how incredible the Mongol army is, in World War I and II, the Russians were using tactics that were developed and passed down by Genghis Khan. Because the thing that made a difference in the Mongol army and every army all the way up to the French Revolution and Napoleon's army is that they would be like, you have your king, and he's like grabbing all of his homies, and he's like, listen, I got 50,000 of you guys. We're all going to go out together in one big line, because that's how they have to coordinate supplies. You have to feed 50,000 people for a course of like however long. The saying has always been an army travels on its belly, because you can only go as far as you can feed your men. And 50,000 people, which is like a regular sized ancient army, would starve in a matter of days if their supply like was cut off, right? Because there's so many people. The difference with the Mongol army is because every single person was on horse, but not only that, every single person in the army had multiple horses that were like dogs to them that they could call like whistles, right? And so along with that, they didn't need to eat from the land. They hunted, but if they needed to, they cut the horses' blood supply and drank it with horse milk, so they can be sustained off of the herd that they bring. And as long as they graze their horses, their army could go literally anywhere. And so their whole strategy was that they didn't need to clump up. They would encounter this one big blob of dudes, and they would separate. Like in World War II, you don't push into areas of high firepower. You go around and cut off supply. And that was the strategy the Mongols were using to beat China, the most sophisticated like country of the world at that time, right? And they didn't just beat them; they destroyed them, to the point that historians for the longest time said the Mongols had army size of like 200,000 to 1 million people. And then they're finding now that it's more like they had 20 to 50,000 people, and they conquered. They had the same amount of people as most other armies, and they conquered the entire world, right? So that was the only thing that I was a bit like, it would be cool if they could have found a way to work this in, but I can't really blame them for not working this. Like even the movie Marco Polo couldn't show that horseback side, because they were like, we're just used to kung fu fighting and everyone fighting on feet, right? So I just wanted to point that out, because I have a very big fascination with the Mongol army, and I just wanted to point out one cool part that
very cool.
If anyone else is interested,
very cool.
Yeah.
All right, well,
that's it. That's all I got.
Speaking about big games focusing on art.
So my topic today, I wanted to go through a bit about. So I have a lot of these conversations about what I do. So I have friends that are not in the gaming industry, because I used to be in marketing, and I tell them, I want to do concept art, or I'm in game art, and no one really knows what that means. I was surprised, because I guess I was insulated as a nerd. But like the general population doesn't even know like what concept art is. And I realized there was even a bigger misconception or misunderstanding of how art is created in games, or just like a mystery. Because I know I had this same kind of mystery when I was going into the industry. Like when I decided to go become a game artist, I was like, I wonder how like this stuff is made. It seems so magical, right? So I wanted to talk about the process that AAA studios use. Because we talked about this before in the Spider-Verse podcast, like I think the process is the most important thing for anyone to kind of get out of. And so I wanted to run through kind of what being a concept artist and developing the art looks like at the beginning of a project, and then what it looks like during the point where we start to make the project. And as someone that works in games, this is like your previs phase versus your main development like phases, right? So I want to talk. The first thing that I've seen, like our studio is going through this now, and a lot of studios are going through it on a regular basis. This previs kind of process, right? And I feel that it's interesting to talk about in terms of what are the strategies that a lot of studios employ, the general strategies. And for artwork, like I think that people, like a game like The Last of Us comes out and there's an art dump and people see all this concept art and they think that that's the stuff that is used to make the game, right? And I think that's a little deceiving because from my experience or from my understanding of any kind of project, like there's different tiers of art that go into play and different ingredients that aren't that don't look anything like the final released art. The final released art is one component in that process, but the things usually start off with, like, let's say we're starting a new game, we have a new IP, we have funding, and we want to figure out what the game looks like. From the art so on a project side, I think this is what I want like to kind of get across. It's gonna be a creative director or someone that's in charge of the creative side of the process, but it's also going to be like your executive producer or other big players of this particular project, right? And the idea that they're going to be getting together in a smaller basis and they're going to try to make these bigger decisions amongst the games that doesn't need to be discussed in terms of a larger audience, because usually it's just too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the image that I have on here is this is the kind of stuff that is probably a little too rendered, but conveys the first types of images that are kind of thrown across. They're mood paintings, or they're mood illustrations, or they're high concept types of illustrations. If you go to the next slide, this is a concept illustration from Spider-Verse, right? The movie doesn't necessarily look like this, but the action and type of style is what they're trying to convey. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get everyone on this executive team, or whoever this small creative team force is, to buy in. And so much of concept art is not just for other artists, but it's to get buy-in from, other stakeholders, like whether it's your engineering department to say, can we make this, right? Your gameplay side to say, does this make sense with what we want to accomplish, right?
Yeah, it is especially important when the driving force can be design, right? Because designers may know like gameplay and emotion, but if they don't have like an artist background, then describing that to other artists can be extremely difficult and sometimes can lead to very big miscommunication. So having mood pieces like this and establish like there is something very different from almost any other type of shooter. You say, I want to make a third person shooter, but I want to also have it be open world and et cetera, et cetera. Those are all building blocks, but then there are so many of those. In what direction do you want to have that? Do you want something slower, like Shadow of the Colossus, which is a third-person open world game, or do you want something more crazy like GTA, right?
Yeah, right. So what I would say is that the process that, like, so the thing that I want to get across is that there are different processes, but what always happens is that there is almost like in a battle, there's a war banner carrier.
Yeah.
Right? The guy who carries the war banner, and that's meant to rally your troops around one section. That's what it is. And it's not always art. Like, I present this because, that's my field, but sometimes it's like a gameplay demo. Maybe a studio comes up with something that's like Hearthstone was made as a demo in Unity, right? Even though Blizzard has its own like kind of engine. And then it became like crazy addictive, and then they added the art stuff, right? That's a whole different thing to like rally around. But the whole idea is that we're trying. If you're going art first, you're trying to rally around an art idea, and even if your art's not first, this idea might play a second fiddle. So say the gameplay is first, this art concept would now have to fit that gameplay, right? It has to do the best job it can, but now it has to serve one type of idea, right? And so the whole process of art is this kind of hierarchy structure in terms of when do we need to decide what, right? And this is the kind of hardest part that I think that, especially if you're in a project as an artist and you're trying to make decisions yourself, you need to do the thing that almost every creative team does, is that they go broader and they go down to the specifics later on. Because if you go too specific too early on, there's too many details, too many specifics to be worrying about, and it's very easy to get lost. What's that saying? You get you
Get
fail
lost
to
in the
see the
weeds.
forest and the trees or something
Yeah.
like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that's basic across almost any sort of development process. Even if you're just developing apps and stuff, it's always starts off with what is the overall vision that we want to go with this. Even before you start designing specific windows and pages and panels.
And if you go to the next slide, like within the art team, one more. You're a little ahead.
I'm a little ahead.
Can you go back one?
This
Can
is
you
it.
just refresh? I think I might have added something since you last.
I downloaded it, so
Okay,
I
don't worry.
can't.
All right, that slide's fine. Wait, what's your next slide?
This one.
Ooh.
Here,
Ooh.
here. Hold on.
I'll talk while I'll talk while
I'll
okay,
fix
yeah.
it. I'll do it.
So okay, the next point was essentially that the art team doesn't need to produce something that's super high detail in this phase. It really needs to the main thing that it's trying to do is elicit like emotions, so that you can steer everyone's general idea. Because what's everyone's going to be doing from this point, like say it goes from this initial previs point and everyone has this pillar to revolve around, then the different departments like engineering, art, animation, gameplay, etc., that go into a game, they're going to go back to their own areas and they're going to start thinking about how they can implement this idea and using what their expertise is. So like artists are going to be thinking about what's the asset creation that we need to make, like gameplay, people are going to be thinking about what are the mechanics and how do they fit in, blah, 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 right? So the point is that this artwork at the beginning, it almost shouldn't be too specific, because if it's too specific, people get locked into a certain idea and they're like, well, we need to make it look like this. So mood paintings early on are almost always very abstract and very just like emotional reads. Sometimes they have a character in there, but the character won't be fleshed out at all, and they do this on purpose so that you can solidify around the idea and not the design of anything particular, right? But then the next step is that after all those kind of previous illustrations go through, on the art side, I want to talk about what is typically the next step, because actually in a project sense, there's a missing gap. What would happen is that you would do this previs art and then it would go away from you for a while, because at this point, the different executive stakeholders would take charge, like your head of engineering or head of gameplay or et cetera. They would start to make their own plan. And once that plan has been fleshed out in terms of, gameplay wants to try this and engineering says they can do this and this is the tech that art wants. This is just the kind of rough image that I was saying that is useful. You can go to the next slide now after this one, actually. On the art side, the next thing that we will typically do is a series of things. And so the next three images are related. This is a bit of an exaggeration because this is an artist rendition, but you're going to start looking at what the aesthetic of your game is. And to do that, or at least your game or your movie, and to do that, you're going to do things like how are we going to render it, or what the final look is going to be like. Right. So this is just like rendering different cubes of material. This is more of an artist exercise, but this is just to represent the idea that if you're a game like Ghost of Tsushima and you want to use this wind idea to help play game, or like to flesh out gameplay, you have to make a decision as to how realistic do you need to render everything to get this feel across. Right. We talked about this earlier. Ghost of Tsushima has a very illustrative quality to it, but it's not necessarily realistic, right? And you can see it all over the place with the colors that they use being all over the place, or the wind being everywhere, right? That's a deliberate decision that they're going to be making in the early stages of this concepting phase. So before they start making any of the specific characters, they're going to be exploring themes about how to render everything and the visual style of it. Go to the next frame. A part of that is going to be gathering reference. This is just 3 images that I have in my big folder of references images that, like, look at any of them and there is something fascinating, I would say, about all of them, right? Like, there's something that would draw your attention, and this is what you want from the reference image that you're gathering for your project. You want something that when you look at it, if it has something that you see that you can use, or it has an interesting element to it that you need to extract and add to your own game. And so a lot of artists and a lot of designers will start off with a big board of things exactly like this, right? I don't know what game you would make from these three images together, but I pointed them all as individual images that have a strong connotation to them that you could possibly explore for your own game. The bottom right, by the way, is a moose that got hit by lightning.
No.
Yeah, and that skin coloration happened because it's partially charred, partially burnt, and I was like, that looks like a zombie kind of decaying type of monster you would see in Annihilation or something, right?
Oh my god. I thought it was
Where and the
tattooed or something.
yeah, right, and the rooster, that sheen just reminds me of like dragon scales or some sort of mythical beast, right?
There is actually an armor die in Ghost of Tsushima. That is
Oh,
that
they look like
exact
that?
same, like
Oh,
exactly the same.
oh.
That sort of mixture of the turquoise green, and almost
Mhm.
as if you panned around
The sheen.
this chicken, you would see the colors kind of ripple. It's that
Mhm.
exact same.
I wonder if they use
It's,
that image.
honestly, I would believe
It's,
it.
it's very possible.
It is pin
You
perfect. I'll
see,
show you it
you see
later.
tons of yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. You see tons of crossover like this because you know all artists are fan of other artists, and then there's a lot of like cross pollination, which I think is personally what makes like amazing art is to combine different ideas together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to the next phase or next
Phrase.
screen now, phrase. So after this initial reference gathering, this is when you start seeing themes like, okay, this is at this point of the development cycle, I would say that every department now has a basic gameplay of what they're hoping to execute. And this is when the artist would actually be working the most. This is when now everyone has like a checklist. Like, we want to put it in the forest. We want this character here, and she wants to be a redhead, and she needs to be blah, 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 and we need to have an environment, blah, blah. So this is when the artist will go through a big thumbnailing phase where they're doing very quick, very rough. They might look really strong in terms of like a non-artist eye, but these are typically designed to be throwawayable because they need to make a bunch of ideas. And this is a concept that is so important if you're an artist yourself, is that we used to say that you have everyone has like 30 bad ideas and one good idea, and it's like panning for gold. You have to you have to get all your bad ideas out, and then you'll find a good idea in the rubble, right?
How long would you say each one of these paintings probably took? These thumbnails.
On the left side there, like from, I would say your intermediate concept artist should be spending maybe like 2 to 3 hours
Wow.
on those, right?
Man.
But this is a bit deceptive because the ones I posted, especially the one on the left here, what often happens is that concept artists will do something in a project and show their art directors. That will be quite messy, but a good art director will be able to visualize the concept that you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then because they get told that this is going to go in the art book, they're going to flesh it up afterwards,
okay.
right? And because they don't want to showcase the messiness, et cetera, et cetera. So
Gotcha.
almost everything you see in concept art books has been touched up by the artists themselves. Like no one really wants to let like the fingerprints through.
It's not like the Mortal Kombat book where it shows you all the napkin sketches for fatalities.
Yeah, no, yeah, I personally love to see that more, because I find a lot of information in where you don't need to do stuff as much as where you do need to do stuff, right? So they do a lot of these sketches, like the ones on the right would take a bit longer. Characters take a lot more time because there's a lot more detail in them. So I would say each of those characters might take 2 or 3 hours, right? But the idea is that you want to pump a ton of these out so that you can kind of compare. And there's strategies that you can do within each one. So like, say you don't want to do a 3-hour drawing. You could do 1-hour ones. You just have to figure out what the process is so that you can do 3 1-hour ones. And maybe that's better. It's always going to be a different number per artist, per art director, how many they want to see. But almost universally, it's accepted that the more thumbnails, the more early process you do, the higher quality you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like having more iterations and more tries to get something good, right?
Yeah.
And then from that phase on, so after you have the thumbnail sketch and people will pick one of these and say that's the environment we want to do, or that's the character we want to do, you can go to the next step, which is in this case I'm using characters as an example, is that they're now going to flesh out this particular character's emotions. Oh, for environments it might be props, right, or angles. And so the concept is that once you pick the first characters that are going to be done, or the first things that are going to be done in the art side in general, are going to be the most important parts of your game. So, if this was a game like Rogue Squadron, it's going to be your ships, right, instead of your characters, right? And they're going to have, instead of expressions, they're going to be like, cockpit up and wings up or something like that, right?
I want to see my ship expressions.
Oh, yeah.
I want to see what an X-Wing looks like when it's sad.
When it's sad, when it's maulding. So this is the next step, and this is essentially as an additional way to help the animators, but also confirm internally, does this thing have the depth that we need it to be? Because usually if it's a main character, your character has to show the most emotions. If it's a key environment, it has to be able to do everything that you want your environment to do, right? So you're exploring the options of this design that you've made earlier, right? And then it won't be until after these options are explored and people are okay with everything that's being decided that they move on to the next step. And this is what typically you see in game release books, is like the not finished, but like rendered out version. This is probably like you've heard the concept of a vertical slice of a game before, right? Yeah. Can you explain? Because I know
vertical slice is basically an encapsulation of all your core gameplay on a post or like an alpha level of art quality.
Mm-hmm. And the idea is just that you want to be able to capture this one moment and say, yeah, in this one snapshot, this is how I want it to look or play or whatever it is, right?
It's supposed to be representative of what the rest of the game should be, the bar that you're trying to hit for everything. Yeah, and it will encapsulate all your core pillars.
Yeah, and exactly, this is the step this is where the art step is. You want to give at least a few super high quality images as blueprints for the rest of the game. And then each one individually, though, would probably have like a character turnaround that's fully rendered. And this time they'll have characters that are colored. This time they'll have all their armor like functionally displayed. These are the designs that are meant to be given to the next step of artists, which is 3D artists or, animators or anything else. Because the whole idea of concept art in video games is to be handed off, and it's just an intermediary tool. I think that's something that's a lot of people misunderstand about concept art, is that it doesn't serve any purpose on its own. It's not an illustration. You're not going to sell this thing, right? It's just a blueprint so that other artists can do their work. Yeah. And that's like a key thing that a lot of artists that get into the game industry doesn't understand, is that so much of what you're doing in a studio is you're one tool for another person, right? And it's a combination of all these people in all these different like roles and skills that like push together and build this massive probably one of the most complicated undertakings in like the civilized world that's like non-military, I would say. Like I don't like
or building a bridge.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's so much more complicated in some ways, because building a bridge has a history of precedent in terms of like what worked and what hasn't worked, and what you could do now and what your options are. Whereas in games, someone could be like, I want you to make like a wormhole game where you play as a worm that needs to eat little monsters as it goes around the wormhole, and you're like, what do I build? What's the building block of that, right? So I would say that there's a uniqueness in terms of in games, that there are unique problems that like you don't see anywhere else in the world, and it challenges people in ways that don't really expect to be challenged, right? Yeah. Anyways, the next thing so the next thing was just an example of the fleshed out characters, but on the character side. So these are Urbac. So I was gonna get into the next step after this, but I realized that the 3D side alone has like another 30 steps, right? Like and that's the kind of tricky thing about art, is that especially in a video game, like a lot of people underestimate, and movies too, but people underestimate how many different steps there actually are. And like one person will usually handle like one or two steps, right? Because after this, like you would bring it to probably, let me do the math in my head. like on a AAA studio like Mortal Kombat, I would say probably like six more people are going to be handed this particular asset off in one form or another, before the complete asset is ready to be animated. That's not even towards the animator. That's just to get the asset made in 3D, to have the textures, to have the topology, to have the neural maps, to have the whole thing done. That would be my guess in terms of how many people it takes. I think that would be my guess for our game too in Gears of War. For any particular asset, if we didn't use an outsourcer for it. Yeah. So anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to do for now. I want to go through like a larger portion of it, but it's gonna need to be like a web of different industries, because it's gonna be like animation begins to, like, the thing about concept art is that once it gets to this point, it branches off to like 100 different industries. So like animation will start working at this point, even though they don't have the final model, they'll be starting to work on it. Modeling will begin to work on it. Almost all the other, like, sound design, but they all can get freed from that point, because now concept art has kind of shown that rallying art pillar in terms of design that everyone needs to like push towards, and it unlocks the ability for the next steps to go.
Yeah.
And after that point, you actually don't see concept art in the game development stage for a very long time. You only see it in aspects of maybe they need to change something or they need to get fixed. But at that point, it's like that's when the game development is kind of on its own like running phase. And you don't and then a lot of concept artists are actually kind of either their contract expires or they're moved on to another project before their particular project that they started even ends.
Do they then move on to marketing or anything like that?
Most of the time,
cases,
like
or not?
Depends on the studio. So a lot of times studios will balance different projects so that they can keep with this swing of going up and down. You know yourself that in most studios, when they get to the point of main development, they like bulging up, right? It's like a bear hibernating. They have to get as many workers in because they have to like deal with this big amount of work that needs to be done. But then they often don't want to hold that many employees, because when they go to the next game, you don't need those people until the concept artists are done, right? So ideally in a larger studio, they'll be able to shift you around to different projects. But in smaller studios, it's not uncommon to just contract to hire one main artist as your principal artist, and then have the others on contractual basis that come in and support your main artist. I always found it kind of interesting that like the art hierarchy has to work like a military hierarchy in so many ways. Like, it in terms of like organizational structure, it's a bit fascist in a lot of ways, because the whole idea is that you need to funnel upwards to one creative director. It's so clear that you can't have tons of people pushing in multiple directions at the top. There's just numerous examples where it doesn't work, and the whole idea of too many cooks in the kitchen is so real for art. But what does work is a hierarchical structure of trust. It's not fascist in the sense that it's totalitarian, because it all revolves around a certain idea of trust. And the idea of trust is that you trust the person above you to give you the right directions, because you can't see the entire picture, because the picture is way too big for any one particular person, right? And so the trust needs to come in the fact that your superiors need to be better than you. You have to trust that, but then it has to go down the other way, in that your superiors need to make their subordinates better. Like a good art leader will not be doing nearly as much hands-on art, but they should be a force multiplier to all the artists underneath them, right? So it's like in this way you can have this pyramid, and everyone's giving their power to the person up top. And
the
then
Genki Dama.
And then it's all multiplying, right? Like all the way to top. And then if you have your structure like done really well, you can get one amazing creative vision across. And it's very rare that you can have that split. Like I would say the fact that the Russo brothers being one of the only famous like duo directors that can work together, like is a fact. Most directors in movies are singular, right? And so it's the same thing in any creative industry. It's for some reason everyone knows you can only have one person steering, but then everyone else can contribute in their own ways, but they have to forego a lot of decision making. And in that sense, that's what I kind of like I appreciated as an artist, is that you have to give up a lot of control but if you're in like a good environment, it feels great because you're like you want to give that power up because you just believe in the person above you so much, right? Yeah, so I just found it really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was incredibly informative. I
cool.
really appreciate that.
All right, so should we go on to our rando sections for a little bit here?
Yeah, we can spend for our allocated 10 minutes.
Okay, so I realized. Yeah, do you have anything?
I was just gonna ask what you were gonna spin up afterwards.
Oh.
Now that Ghost of Tsushima has passed, because I'm my objective is to finish Ghost of Tsushima, and I think afterwards I'm getting a Yakuza remastered collection, so I'm gonna start up on Yakuza 5 again.
You're diving into the Japan theme, eh?
Yeah, I figured I might as well. Also, it was $20 off, and I got
Yakuza
halfway
is
through
great.
Yakuza 5 on PS3, and then they announced the remaster collection. I'm like, well, why am I going to continue it here?
True.
So
did they change a lot in the remastered? Is it just like
it's a new dub.
Game?
It's a new translation. And they added in a bunch of content that was previously cut because it was deemed too hard to translate.
Oh, that's
so
weird. Holy crap. So did the Japanese version have different content?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wow. I didn't
so it might only have been Yakuza 3 that they retranslated, because I know 8-4 Play did the translation for some of them. I know they I didn't look this up, so I probably shouldn't talk about it, but I know they did update the translation for some of the games, and they added in content that was previously cut. And I know that's 100% the case for Yakuza 3. I'm not sure about the other ones.
Oh, okay.
I've done Yakuza, I've done Yakuza 3 and 4, and 5 was, I have 6, but I needed to finish 5, and I've been stagnating on it because I've been
not played any of them.
Oh my god!
Yeah, is if I were to start, which one would you want me to start on? 1? Don't tell me 1. How long ago was 1?
Well, they remade 1.
Oh, did they?
Yeah,
that makes
like a year and a half ago, and then last year they remade the second one, and now you
so
have
they're on that phase.
Well, they don't need to remake Yakuza 3 because they just remastered it instead of remaking it, because it was already a PS3 game, so they just upped the resolution, retranslated it, and added in some stuff back in. So now you can play all the games on the PS4 platform. Eventually, I assume they'll bring it over to PC, because Kiwami 1 and 2, which are the remakes, are on PC. Same with 0. I would recommend starting with... If you are gonna be invested in this franchise, I would say
what's the best one to get me in it? Forget the if you want to go through the entire franchise. No, give the best one. Do you think?
Zero. Do 0. 0 is the one that you're gonna get a very up to date combat engine, with some fun stories. It's definitely funner if you have played the previous games, but it's a prequel, right? So you're not gonna be left behind too much.
Okay, that's good.
There'll be characters that show up and be like, oh, so this is what they were doing before.
It'll just be a surprise when I play 1 then, actually.
Yeah.
Instead of it being a surprise in 0, like, oh, that's who this character is?
Yeah.
You're surprised by that the character that's already there.
Yeah. Cool. It's just that one of the characters, there are 2 playable characters in 0, and one of them was a supporting character throughout the franchise, and his representation in 0 is very different from how he appears in 1. So like that's the surprising part, that you go like, oh, I thought he was going to be completely different, but it turns out he was a very different person.
Right. This is like never mind. I thought I had an example, but I don't have it.
Yeah. So that's what I'm going to do until August 18th, when Microsoft Flight Simulator comes out.
Oh my god. Are you a big flight sim guy?
I want to say I am, but in reality, I'm not. I love the idea of them, but I don't think I have that many fly hours in them.
It's so complicated. It's so complicated.
I tried playing a DCS digital combat simulator, because a friend is very much into it, and they said you should go different. I'm like, okay. I jump into the plane, I have a startup guide, and I'm flicking all the switches, and then the plane starts yelling at me in Russian, and I get scared and I alt F4. It's like, how did you get off the ground? I'm like, no, it started yelling at me in Russian. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was gonna ruin the plane before I even got off the ground.
I realized my mistake with flight sims, like that. When I hear the word sims, I now know to avoid it, because I first tried one in VR, And I was like, because I wanted to like, play VR, and it'd be cool to do a flight sim,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
then I was just like, man, it's so freaking complicated to fly anything. There's so many buttons. There's so much terminology that's like not intuitive whatsoever. Like and you realize like, oh, this is too much for me to take in VR. At
Did
the
you set
same
your
time,
flaps? Did you configure your
I
airloins or
know. And
whatever?
then the pre-flight checklist, and then which I find amazing because they can train you to fly actual planes and stuff, which is I think is a great. But it's like truck
You have to
simulator
look
me.
for it outside the game though, and that's what I'm hoping with Microsoft Flight Simulator, the new one. Maybe it will like actually give you a pre-flight checklist
That would
on
be
your
great.
computer, and you can follow through that way. Because tutorialization of those things is you have to look all the way back, right?
Yeah, you have to.
But I
go
love
through
watching
actual
videos.
training.
Yeah. I love watching the videos of people who are air traffic controllers in real life being air traffic controllers in Flight Simulator, and
Would
they're
you be
just
tired?
goofing around, and it's
Oh.
and
They get
it's
to like
great.
crash all their planes finally. Like, yeah, that's right. Oh my god.
Terrible.
I have to finish some freelance work, and for me, I realize that I'm at the point right now where I do not want to do any more freelance work.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. It's the problem for me now is that it's like a numbers game. Okay, like if I in my spare time like to make like artwork that I sell either as prints or as canvases or et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, do I spend the time to do a piece of freelance where I have to first off I have to please one person. It's not a lot of people, but I have to please one person, and this person like is not sorted as an artist the way like a regular like art industry person would be. It's like a random person, and so it's like having an art director that is a random person, and then it
then you
causes
lose your
conflict.
trust, right?
You lose your trust, or you pretty much just this is what happens in any art situation. If you have an art director that doesn't know what they're talking about and they tell you to do something, what has to happen is that either the artist below doesn't listen to you, which they're going to get fired, so that's not going to happen, or they forego their decision making and thought process to take in your answer. And the big problem with that is now they don't know what's reality. They don't know what's good and bad because they have to find a way to sync up this reality that you presented that's not true, and they have to make it work. So it's like saying that he wants you to incorporate something that's going to make your art worse, but you're supposed to trust them that it's going to make it better. And then when it makes it worse and you do it, you lose that trust. And then now, not only do you lose that trust, but now this person isn't trying to make it better and using their own skill set to improve the art. They're trying to please that person and get and try to guess what he wants, which is a completely different thing, right? And that's the game of freelance, is that you're trying to guess what this one person wants. And for me, it's not like that's the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that it's a trade-off, because I can do that, or I can paint whatever I want, make my own carls as an artist and try to work on that, and then sell it for anyone who happens to like it, which is a much easier proposal than trying to like make one person love one painting, where I can make one painting and then find just a bunch of people that love it.
Do you find it's a crowded environment for you to sell something that you just create on your own, or are you at the level?
I would say it's a very crowded environment, but I would say that I personally have found or have been able to get to a certain level that can stand above. So like if you imagine a bell curve, at a certain level, you're going to be at a certain percentage above the game that allows you to stand out. I don't know what that threshold is. It's so hard for an artist, because at a certain point you become out of touch with the non-artist person, and you can't see what looks good to them doesn't look necessarily good to you, because you're kind of a critic now, right? You might be right, but doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. They like what they like, right? So I would say that it's crowded, but there's just so much of people not being able to connect with the art that they like, that there's such a high chance you'll find someone that hasn't been able to find someone else. You might not be the best yet, right? But they'll still love your work, right? So I think what happens is, as an artist, when you're younger or you're smaller, you have a smaller pool of fans, right? And then as you progress as a stronger audience, your pool expands naturally, even if you're not targeting anyone, just because now you're palatable to a larger portion of the population, because you're doing the fundamentals better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's not to say it's a crowded field in terms of you want to make a living out of it,
Mm-hmm.
which let's just say anything is very difficult to make a living out of, especially any kind of hobby,
Mm-hmm.
and art is no kind of exception.
Mm-hmm.
But like I realized early on in my art career that like you have to be able to be willing to be bad to be good, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I spent a lot of time, not succeeding with paintings and drawings, and then now I'm at a point where I've kind of figured out the things to do right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's not to say that I've learned everything, because I'm realizing now in my own art career, like, okay, like you just said, are my paintings good enough to get noticed, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I would say yes, but now my next problem is like, where do I get them noticed, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Mm-hmm.
whole different problem that you kind of have to answer, and it's almost just as valid in terms of your own artwork as some of the other questions, right?
Do you feel it would be? Do they ever touch on that? Did you go to school? You went to school
Yeah,
for art, yeah? Do they
I
ever
did.
touch
Yeah.
on getting noticed for your
So
working?
yeah, the notice me senpai lesson was very short. Like I would say that so I went to a private art school, and that's not to say it's fancy, it's to say that it's like run for money, right? And and so it was a 1 year program. It was a compact program, and it's not like a 4 year art university degree or something like that.
Hmm.
So, and I would say that still that there's very little emphasis on your business plan. I would say
Hmm.
there's more now because there's a lot more artists that have gone out there and realized that they need more, and so they bring it back in. But it's just like it's kind of like the school system. They don't have enough emphasis on the actual skills that you would need to use. Which, let's just like you might not want it, but marketing is very very important, right? And I come from a marketing background, so I'm fortunate to have that a basic foundational understanding. But like it's super important even if you are in the art industry, not selling your own art, and you want to be an industry worker. Like you need to
Mm-hmm.
be able to promote yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of say that with any job. But I would say that's like a missing skill. I would hate to say that like I'm sad they don't teach that, but my truth sadness is that I think that there's a massive flaw in the art teaching educational like community right now. Um, there are very few high quality and reliable art schools that are around, like art centers in New York, and that's kind of like the Harvard type school for art people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like in Vancouver, there's not anywhere nearly as strong, and I would say that art has moved to a new phase of the digital medium, right? And now there's this massive chasm between traditional artists and digital artists, in that they're almost different industries. You have your digital artists that are like me, who work in games and film, that have to have digital, and then there's the painters that want to be more traditionalist and do stuff that's like where the painting itself is the point of your work, right?
Mm.
But that means that for the past however how many 100 years, all art and education has been made for traditional, and now there's this massive jump in technology, and there's no proper training for artists. All the artist training that I see now it's the type of education that you get that will be irrelevant in 2 to 3 years if you don't get a job in the industry right away,
Well, and what
or
makes you say
very
that?
soon.
In what
It's
way?
because the let's, for example, when I first started like school, Unity just got like into industry hands, right?
Mm.
And before that, Unreal, if you wanted to use, I think it was Unreal at 3 at the time. If you
Mm-hmm.
wanted to use their engine on your own game, you had to buy their proprietary
License,
software,
yeah.
which was like $1 million or something like that. It was something larger than the average person could get.
Prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, and then the moment I graduated, the entire industry shifted to these game engines that teams can build out of, and smaller teams can be made out of, right?
Mm.
So that shift happened, and then suddenly people needed to know Unity. Like so many jobs came out and needed to know Unity. If I graduated a year before that, I wouldn't have had that skill set at all,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing what I'm trying to say is that because the technology is growing so fast, so much of the school is based around telling you a set of instructions on how to do this exact same thing properly with this exact same software. and it's missing so much of the fundamentals that was in traditional media and traditional painting and artistry, like some of the more foundational stuff that took you a lot longer to learn, but they're not being taught nearly the same degree because the schools have to be separated, because you can't teach a painter has very little to teach someone that needs to work in Photoshop or like in 3D Max or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So what I found, and this is actually something I've been thinking a lot about doing some particular content on, is that I want to talk about what I always say in my head, there's like in art, there are like infinity stones, right? There's like these different concepts that all represent basic fundamentals, but if you master them, you literally are Thanos and you can create worlds and destroy worlds because you can just paint them, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I wanted to break down what those concepts are, because I didn't learn this in school. I had to piece it together through working in the game industry over the years, right? And then I wanted to break those particular pieces down and then find and see if there was a better way to teach those concepts. And not to teach those concepts, but teach how an artist can progress. Like I wanted to essentially teach the Bushido style of art that will help you improve regardless if you're at the beginning or at the end. Because I think that art is like really good artists are actually a process. I see them as people who have a process that's hidden, but they have a process that they can teach themselves and gather information. And what most people see is the results of what they pump out, right? But what I see is someone in the middle of their career, and even a master is like, I need to learn this next skill. How do I figure out this next skill? And so what makes them masters is that they know how to do it. They might take some time, but they have a guaranteed process to move to the next step consistently. And I think that that's something that a lot of artists can learn, but it's so much harder to teach because you can't just be like, hey, follow these 5 steps. It's like you need to have this mind frame and way of thinking that will allow you to solve these problems yourself.
Right.
Obviously, that's very, very difficult, but I think that's kind of one of the only solutions in this field, because if you teach someone a course and the thing that they're learning is irrelevant in like 2 or 3 years, like you're just teaching them a sequence of buttons to press, right?
Yeah.
Like how I wish that I had learned something that was in, like I had learned a few things, but I wish I learned more things that were able to stay with me as I grew in my career, that were like foundational, that I could keep growing in. Yeah.
That's interesting and unfortunate that doesn't happen for your industry, because definitely in computer science, at least where I studied, they made a point they didn't want to teach you a tool, right? So even in the first year, you don't do C++, is you learn fundamentally what it means to program something. You learn fundamental programming concepts and you learn how to learn a programming language. What do you search for? Like what is a standard library that a programming language has? Where do you go looking for that? What are the core fundamentals of methods and functions, and what makes good programming, right? What is then they teach basic concepts that you're going to use anywhere: if statements, recursion, memory management. And then only when you get to like intermediate levels, it's like, okay, here's C++, here's how it manages memory, here's how C manages memory, here's how a garbage collector works.
You're set up now.
You're set up now. You know how to learn C.
Yeah.
Because they taught you how to learn any programming language beforehand.
It's actually, I really think that it's essentially the scientific method, but for applied in different industries. And that's what like art is very scientific in a lot of ways. I think that's especially in the digital era now, like you can't get into a side where you're like, I'm one of those freeform artists that, like can just do everything from my own head and not need to utilize technology at all. Like I think that's just a bit of a ages past now, and you need to be able to translate your skills to a digital world, and so the way I say art is so scientific is because it's all about trial and error. The thumbnailing process I was telling you about, that's a trial and error thing. You're just getting more test subjects to be able to get data in points for, right? And I think it's very natural that the programming side would pick on that up like right away. It's so like processed. Like you're essentially, when you're building a game, you're building a process,
literally
right?
derived from the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
It's a science.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what that's where I came from an art. I do want to put those videos together, but I need to like put all my thoughts down in one place before I can kind of
Yeah,
put
I
everything
can see
together.
how
But I
that
think
can
that
be
might
an
be useful.
undertaking.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Put something back out in the world would be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, that's
right.
it for me.
I think that's a good time for us to wrap up
Yeah, let's do it.
in a very successful. I was too busy saying it in Japanese that I didn't even say we've made it to episode 7.
Yo, lucky number 7.
Lucky number 7.
Yeah.
Here's to many more in the future
Yeah.
as we keep bringing all this content and this great music that I'm playing right now from Adrian Talents. Press start. Everyone that watches, everyone that follows us can find us at our respective Twitter handles. And keep practicing your art, keep playing video games, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and find us right here beyond the pixel.
Bye, guys.